and I'm a fan of her poetry. And just recently, I read her book as well. And welcome to this session of the power of the word, whether it's spoken or written. And you're very welcome with us. And I just wanted to start off by using your own words on you. I remember at one place you said there's just one of me and so many of you, and I feel that with you just now. There's just one of me and there's so many of you. You're a poet, you're a novelist, you're a broadcaster, spoken word artist, activist, mentor. But there must be other facets that I haven't yet got hold of. But tell me, what do you see broadly yourself? What do you see yourself mainly as? Out of all these various avatars.
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me, and hello to everyone that's tuning in, and hello to you. It's lovely to meet you. Let me think. I just see myself as just as a writer, really. And then there's loads of different types of writing that I've learned to do. I think when you're a woman, when you're a working class woman or a woman of colour, the door into writing isn't easy, and often you pick up other skills along the way. So when I was a young poet, I believed by setting my poetry to music that this would be an easier door in, a way of expressing and sharing my words and my poetry with music, because the door to publishing seemed very elitist and difficult to get in. It was hard, really hard work for me to get a publishing deal, but a little bit easier to get a record deal, or to put my poetry out in that way as spoken word and in performance, as opposed to as written, on the page and in books. But I ended up getting lots of my poetry published in anthologies, and then I just kept going at it. And then I would make my own chapbooks and self-publish and sell and swap these for people's books. We would swap or just give them away, or really just for £1, like really cheap, just to get bus fare home and get about. Just little self-published scenes. So I think that when you come from a background like that, you learn to be very DIY, and you learn to do all different kinds of writing, be it memoir writing, little bits of articles and essays. You just go where the love is. You go where someone, where you can get your work published, where you see a little hole in the fence and you can get through and get your voice heard. And so performance and activism and speaking publicly came very much from that, from trying to find a way to share my writing, and get my work out there and get my voice heard. Yeah.
Right? Basically, as a spoken word poet, as a writer of words, but you do try to broadcast yourself in some way. Even your latest novel, I believe, is available for audio listening.
Yeah, it's an audiobook too. Yeah, I really enjoyed making the audiobook, actually. That was a really enjoyable part of the process. I've always been really at home with studios and recording and making radio programs and things like that. I enjoy it. I enjoy this. Hello. Yeah, it's good. It's good. I like talking. Yeah. Okay. Chatting, listening to people, meeting people.
That's wonderful. So I just read your latest, your novel, your first novel, in fact, Mrs. Death. And, when I see your videos and I read your poetry, it's so full of life. Like when you talk of blood in red, you talk about it, but it is kind of a, we know it's a life-affirming kind of blood, not one that is shed through warfare or death. It's another kind of blood. And then you've written also that wonderful poem, Pessimism is not for lightweights. Pessimism is for lightweights, sorry.
Yeah, hang on.
So, the fact that you're a very life-affirming person, I was wondering what made you write your first novel on something like death, and it isn't, there's a disclaimer, and then you go on, and it's a very amazing novel because it changes form, and it's not just prose. It's also there's like a little play in there. There are bits of poetry in there. It travels through various eras, and it's sort of but the underlying message or the underlying leitmotif is death. So I was wondering what made you go to death.
Well, there's lots of answers to that. Let me try and think of the best way to describe why I made that choice. I think the book is really more about life than it is about death. It's about survival. At the beginning of the book, I don't want to give too much away, but at the beginning of the book, we have this character, Wolf, who's very much in the shadows and very dark and very close to suicidal thoughts, unwanted thoughts. And then by the end of the book, we see how death teaches us to live, how being close to death teaches us to live, how mourning and grieving and teaches us, and how we can grow and learn, and how death is very much part of life, and so to sort of have this playful way of talking about death and life as sisters, for example, as sisters that kind of compete for the same lover, who is time. And so you have life and death as sisters, and Mrs. Death's very disregarding of her sister. She's like, oh, my sister, just skipping around with the cherry blossom, and and this kind of like how sisters can be with each other, but they kind of need each other. So I think it very much is my personality. I think that Mrs. Death has a lot of me in her, but also I think she's got a lot of my great grandmother in her. And when I first started writing, during the process, of writing this book, I, just like Wolf, I was walking through East London, and I feel like I heard a voice saying, I know a lot of dead people now. And that whole chapter came out in one piece, in one monologue. And I walked all through East London, just recording it into my phone and typing madly into my notes. And that whole piece came out in one thing, walking down through Whitechapel and down past the mosque and on through East London, as described in the book. And down towards Bow, and so that my great grandmother was an amazing healer, and she was a midwife, and she was a doula, and like a death doula, and she was a very wise woman. She couldn't read and she couldn't write, but she knew all the leaves and herbs and all the medicines, natural herbs, natural medicines. And there's a black and white photograph of her always next to my mother's bed and next to my grandmother's bed. And I remember as a little girl always loving this one photograph and being really fascinated. I think she's maybe my favorite ancestor there. So I think there's a lot of her in there, and in this kind of like death is the medicine, life is the medicine, and this kind of the word medicine is very much in there. Yeah. Yeah, but with regards to the different forms that I've chosen, and it goes from memoir writing to diary writing, poetry, song lyrics. There's a little play, little duologue in there, as you said. That was me kind of playing with the idea that if Mrs. Death were to hear people's last words, last regrets, last sorrows, last goodbye, that they wouldn't just all come in prose. They would come, some of them as songs, and some of them as poems, and some of them as garbled sort of stream of consciousness. And so I really wanted to sort of show that people's last stories as they die would be like this, would be many textures, and many feelings. Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. So the other question that follows from that is that death is often culturally portrayed as a man, the guy in the hood and the scythe and things, and you have rendered her female, and when you render death as a woman, do you think it can be at odds with a certain kind of feminism which sees like women as life affirmers, and not as people who are doling out death, and that's more the man's role because they're the ones who historically initiate wars or I mean, generally. How do you see that working out in your mind?
That's very, very true. You're very on the money there. To write death as a woman, we immediately start to look at death and war and the world from a woman's point of view. I'm a woman as a woman's point of view. And for example, you mentioned war. So when we write about war from a woman's point of view, we are immediately thinking about the vulnerable, the elderly, the women, and the children. When we write about war from a man's point of view, we think about shiny tanks and shiny bombs, and we play soldiers, and it's a very different view. But from a woman's point of view, it's the people that are left behind, the people building hospitals out of rubble, and as we're seeing right now in the world right now, and I mean, I tried to also examine women as destructive and women as serial killers. I mentioned the Moors murders, they're very famous Moors murders and things like that. So I tried to sort of show women as also being killers and as being destructive. Because this idea that women can't be fierce, that women can't be angry, that women don't also have rage is important. I think it's important to show that. We have good reason to. Yeah.
And there's another serial killer who is historically thought of as a man and is a woman in your novel. So, I mean, I won't give the game away to those who haven't read it, but that was very interesting. So, also, you described yourself as Jamish. You're half Jamaican and you're half Irish. I feel I don't know, I feel in your novel you tend towards your Jamaican roots. Wolf is also, kind of, the protagonist is that, and then the little tree of the ancestral kind of tree that you build up right at the end, beautifully sort of drawn. That also has a lot of kind of. Well, it goes towards all parts of the world, but I just feel that you tend a bit more towards your Jamaican roots. Mm-hmm. And then I also read somewhere or saw an interview of yours in which you said that you actually shut yourself up, which really intrigued me, in a tower in Ireland for a month to sort of to feel the dank and the spiders and the dark and and that was in Ireland. So I'm wondering, is there any kind of symbolism there, or it just happened to be in Ireland? Are you kind of more Jamaican than you are Irish? Is there? Am I reading into it as a poet?
I think when the phrase Jamish was something I made up. Because, when people constantly ask you, where are you from? Where are you really from? And so I started being, just sort of creative with that. So I was like Jamish, Jamaican, Irish, English, mixing it together. So I sort of made up this word. I don't really see them as separate entities. I feel very much like a mix of many cultures and of many stories and lives. As we grow, as we get older, we change and we learn and take on things and change our mind about things too. But yeah, I don't know. The family tree. Okay, let's start there. The family tree, some of that family tree, I did a DNA test. So some of that family tree is some of my family tree. I have a very mixed family tree. There are parts of me from Nigeria and Africa, and then and Ghana, and then there are parts of me that are Viking. And so I have this real old blood, mixed up old blood. I think of myself as very ancient old blood. So I kind of put that in Wolf's lives in Wolf's family tree as well, to be authentic and to look at some of those ancestors and make stories and give those stories to Wolf's story. But yeah, the tower in Ireland was throughout the writing of this book. Okay, this book was written behind the back of all my other projects, so I didn't have agent. I didn't have a book deal. I was just making this work for the love of it, to see what I was writing and to work on it. And so I got this opportunity to go and stay in the tower that's owned by Bill Drummond of KLF. And it was a very strange time, because I wrote to him a very nice letter, because I heard that he let artists sometimes stay there. And then that same week, I got an invitation to go there. So it was like I wrote to ask, and then the letter arrived inviting me, and neither knew. So it was, I was going whether I liked it or not. It's like, oh, I'm definitely going then. But it was an amazing opportunity. I had it in my head that Mrs. Death would live in some kind of tower or lighthouse. That was like really strong feeling in my head. And I'd nearly finished the book, but I needed to just get that ending. And so I went and stayed in this tower for the solitude and the isolation. There's, when we're really writing about death, I think we're really writing about fear. And so I had to look at the things I feared, and like being scared of the dark, or being scared of being alone, or being scared of ghosts, or being scared of being in a disused prison tower writing about death, surrounded by all these spirits and all this feeling and all this cold. And it was a very emotional time. But, by the end of the month, I made really, really nice friends with the local village people, and I really, really loved it there, But those first few nights, I was really scared, that's for sure. But was that an analogy? I think probably. And I think probably my greatest fear was fear of success or fear of failure. And even bigger than that, probably fear of rejection. So I came back from Ireland and then gave the manuscript, the finished book. I wrote the last chapter there in that tower, and then gave the manuscript to an agent, and had to wait and see if they would reject it or accept it or not, after many, many years of many, many rejections and many, many try, fail, fail, So it was a real kind of gamble. Yeah.
Okay, and there's the tower, and there's also in the book itself, there is that the desk, which I find, which is Mrs. Death's desk, and it's kind of a beautiful, the way you've described the way the desk kind of remembers its past life, and it's just kind of goes as an ongoing process. Somehow the analogy seems to me that the desk remembers that it was a tree, and it wants to be a piano, and there's all kinds of things happening. Simultaneously and before and perhaps ahead, and how it transfers its feelings, or its or it manifests Mrs. Death to Wolf, and so it's kind of like a little portal as well, the desk.
Yeah.
And it kind of, for me, again, at a very simple reading, shows itself to be like death itself, with the beginnings, ends, things happening simultaneously, tentacles going forward, backwards. And I thought it was, even that image of Mrs. Death standing at the desk, and, just stays in your mind. And so I don't know where you got that image from of the desk. I was just wondering.
Okay, well, the desk is here.
Okay, you're right.
And I did actually, when I was younger, buy this old desk, and I do feel like it's a lucky desk. And when I bought it, I did wonder who had ever. It's quite ancient. And it's got secret little drawers and things. And I was always wondered like who has written here before. And you can sort of see the ingrain of other pen marks. So there's that genuinely is a real thing. But I really liked the idea of the desk being quite flamboyant, quite a kind of like big character. Like I could have been a piano. Like it's just fabulous.
I love that.
I enjoy the desk as being this kind of flamboyant character.
Manifests itself in a way kind of in a very individual way, the desk does, I think.
Yes.
It's beautiful. So okay, elsewhere I read there was an interview of yours, and you said that you feel that poetry is spiking in Britain. and you talked about a whole lot of things. I mean, you talked about, on the one hand, money and bankers and all that, people who manufacture wars, etc. And on the other hand, you talk about poets and writers and intellectuals. And you yourself, I know, are a mentor to a lot of young people, and some as young as 16, 17, who are writing poetry, and you actively mentor them. And so there's this divide, and it's good to hear that you feel that poetry is spiking in Britain. I mean, I wish it would all over the world, because I think that can only be a good sign, of good things happening, and of poetry is. I mean, young people write poetry. I think it's idealistic. I think people who continue to write poetry, like yourself, I mean, they do have that idealistic streak, and you're an activist as well. You are very much somebody who marches, who goes and reads your poetry at these protests and at these marches for women, for other things. So do you think it's a good thing that there's a lot of poetry being read, that you have the opportunity to read it at various events, and that is there something which is changing things, and which is the zeitgeist, and are people going more into poetry, and by extension into things that are positive, which are life affirming, which are good, rather than the opposite?
Oh God, I hope so. I hope so. I have. Okay, so there's a lot to unpack there. That's a very big question. Okay, I'm really excited about poetry. I'm excited about the young poets that are coming up, that are bringing their energy, that are using their creativity and their voices. Because let's be honest, it's their future that's being destroyed, and it's their world, really. I don't really. There's so much to say on this, but I suppose when we go right back, let's go back. When I was 14, when I was a little girl writing poems, nobody was listening to 14-year-old girls writing their poems. No one. There was no internet. There was, and it was all terrifying. The threat of nuclear war felt very big and terrifying, and Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan in the 1980s, and it all felt very scary and big. And all I can say is that my fears were valid, and the way I felt was valuable. And those poems, those funny little poems that I wrote and read to my school friends, were valid and valuable. But now we do have the internet, and now we do have young people, but that can protest and use their creativity and their art and their music and their words to speak up and to fight for the planet and to fight for their future. And I will do everything to help them to do that. So, yeah, I really feel quite passionate about that, and yeah, I think that in Britain there's been just a real wave of incredibly beautiful new young voices and fresh new voices coming through. I get sent quite a lot of poetry and a lot of poems, and I email with my friends and we talk, and yeah, I do. I have so much faith in that, but I think it is rippling globally. I do think it's happening all over the world. There are amazing young American poets too, and in other places, Australia too, and in other places too. But when you mention the word idealism, there's a part of me that always thinks, well, if we're not being idealistic, what are we being? Are we being nihilistic? Are we being pessimistic? I would rather be, hopelessly optimistic and have hope and visualize that things are going to get better. Because if you can't picture it, if you can't picture that things are going to get better, that there's going to be peace, that there's going to be an improvement, that there's going to be, then what are you visualizing? I sort of think when we look at literature and we have The Handmaid's Tale and we have 1984, these are all visualizations of it all going even really wrong. And why aren't we writing a better ending? Why aren't we writing a better tomorrow? I know I sound hopelessly idealistic, but I do believe that if we can paint or imagine or write a better tomorrow, then that self-fulfilling prophecy, then that imagination has got to help. It's got to be, if you can't even imagine it, if you can only imagine it all getting worse, then it will. We have to, hope is a group project, as another one of my catchphrases.
Yeah.
Hope is a group project. And if we all hope together, and if we all visualize, and have like a positive outlook. Oh, listen to me. I do sound idealistic. I do. I know I do. I can hear myself.
I don't think you're the only one. I think so many people, take encouragement from your idealism, and they want to be idealistic. And somewhere along the line, perhaps they become jaded or whatever, or they just say, "Oh, this is life." But if there weren't people like you, it would just become all very kind of boring and blasé. So people like you. And
Thank you.
I would like it. I think we have very few minutes left. And I would really love you to read something from Mrs. Death. Whether it's a poem or a bit of it or whatever you want to, just to give our audience an idea about what you wrote. And it gets everything, right? There's poetry in there. There's all kinds of, all genres of writing. So, whatever you read is good for us.
Okay, let's see. What have I got? Oh, sorry. I'll just read this really short piece. This is the desk speaking.
Okay.
The desk. You grow into your shape. You grow and become who you are. You grow into your shape. I could have been anything, but this was the shape the world carved into me. I'll just think that a little bit. I'll just do that.
That is so beautiful, yes. And it was really quite wonderful to sort of to have this opportunity to interact with you. And I see the book behind you. So where it's available, and which publisher, so that some of us can get it. Because what struck me about the book, I had it printed out. Your agent sent it to me, and towards the end, I saw all these blank pages. And I said, why are all these blank pages? And then I read your right to the end, and I said, you wrote that, you can add to the list of dead people. You can keep this as a copy and add to it, and all the people who have passed on or died or whatever. Yeah. And then, you can, this book can carry forward, and, people can put names in it and can become.
I made the back of the book into a kind of shrine, as I wanted people, because I realized that a lot of people have lost people, and people that would be drawn to this book would likely be people who have lost people. So I left this last 6 pages blank so people could write the names of the people they thought of while they were reading the book. Then as the book is passed on and borrowed, then other people will add names, and this would be like a kind of shared ritual of people that read the book at the back of the books. Some people have gone to town. They've put like photographs and sellotapes and glued in poems and letters and pictures in the back of their book. They've made their back of the book into a little collage, if you like, and so I just think that's beautiful. And I've been really touched by complete strangers have got in touch and sent me their back pages to show me. So it's almost like I'm invited to carry on the conversation with them, which is really humbling and incredibly beautiful and touching.
It's a very novel idea also for this particular kind of book, and just for that reason, I'm going to get the book itself, and I'm going to add my own, my pages to it. But thank you so much, Salena. It was it was amazing to talk to you. I loved your book, and I would recommend everybody that they should pick it up, they should read it. And I think it can be many readings, you can read it and then reread it, and so much comes into it. I heard about the tower story, your tower story, then towards the end of the book there was a tower story, and it just kind of gets richer by the moment. But thank you so much for being with us.
Oh, it's been so lovely to meet you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Bye.